On a cold, wind-cut morning at an active Air Force base, an elderly man sat quietly on a maintenance crate beside the towering silhouette of an F-22 Raptor. Snow blew across the flight line in thin white sheets. Jet exhaust from distant aircraft drifted like rolling fog, and airmen hurried past without giving him more than a confused glance. Dressed in his faded red shirt, worn blue jeans, and boots that had seen decades of life, he looked like someone who had wandered far from where he was supposed to be. A few young airmen spotted him first and immediately burst into laughter. To them, he looked like an old civilian who got lost, a harmless relic sitting beside a machine worth more than $150 million. But the truth, what was coming, would stun every man on that flight line, because the old man had once flown something far deadlier than the Raptor. And the moment his forgotten call sign left his lips, the pilot of the jet would freeze. Keep listening, and which city are you listening from? And if you enjoy the story, please subscribe for more. The mocking began as soon as the airmen approached. "Hey, Grandpa," one shouted over the howl of the wind, "this isn't the museum tour, that's the real thing." Another laughed loudly. "Careful, guys, don't scare him, he might think it's still World War II. Their sarcasm echoed across the concrete. The old man didn't react. He simply kept staring up at the Raptor's nose, studying the aircraft with steel-gray eyes that held more history than any of them could imagine. "Sir, you really can't be here," a third airman added with a smirk. "Unauthorized civilians don't get VIP seating next to fifth-gen fighters." More laughter. One of them nudged his friend. "Maybe he thinks it's a crop duster. Look at him, red shirt, old boots. He's probably never even seen a fighter jet up close." The old man finally looked at them, not angry, not offended, just sad. "She's sitting heavy in the nose," he said softly, nodding toward the jet. "Your trim readings will be off on takeoff." The airman blinked, confused. "What are you talking about, old-timer?" "Block 35 Raptors don't like forward weight bias," the old man murmured. "Buck left on rotation if you're not ready." The airman stared at him, then burst out laughing again. "Block 35, old man, this isn't a video game, you don't know anything about Raptors." But the old man simply placed a hand on the crate, steadying himself as he rose. His movements were stiff but deliberate, like someone whose body aged but whose mind still moved with military precision. "I used to fly," he said quietly. "A long time ago." One airman folded his arms. "Yeah. And what exactly did you fly?" The wind howled across the runway as the old man took a breath. "Dragons." The airman blinked again. "What?" He looked toward the Raptor's canopy, eyes distant. "We called them dragons," he said. "Fast, mean, no room for mistakes." The airmen exchanged mocking grins, assuming dementia, delusion, or exaggeration. But before they could tease him again, a cockpit canopy hissed open. The F-22 pilot climbed out onto the ladder, helmet tucked under his arm, preparing for pre-flight checks. His eyes swept across the scene lazily until they landed on the old man. Then they froze. The helmet slipped from his grasp. His face went pale. Breath caught in his throat. The airman beside him frowned. "Sir, you okay?" The pilot didn't hear him. His voice came out barely above a whisper, shaking with disbelief. That can't be. That's Iron Hand 6. Every airman turned toward the old man at once. The mocking stopped. Silence swallowed the flight line. For a long moment, the only sound on the flight line was the lonely whistle of the winter wind sliding across the concrete. The airmen stared at the pilot, stunned by the sudden change in his expression. He was pale, frozen, eyes locked on the old man in the faded red shirt, as if he'd just seen a ghost step out of military history. One of the younger airmen finally broke the silence, voice cracking. "Sir, who is Iron Hand 6? The pilot didn't answer immediately. He stepped down from the ladder with slow, reverent movements, boots crunching in the snow. His helmet lay forgotten on the ground. His eyes never left the old man. "Please tell me it's really you," he murmured. The old veteran lifted his gaze, weathered hands tucked into the pockets of his blue jeans, breath fogging in the cold air. "Haven't heard that call sign in decades," he said softly. The airmen exchanged confused, uneasy glances. The one who had mocked him first tried to laugh it off. "Come on, sir, this guy, he's just some old visitor who—" The pilot snapped. "Quiet, airman." The sudden authority in his voice cut like a blade. All three airmen stiffened immediately. The veteran sighed, rubbing his white beard. "Son, I'm nobody special anymore, just passing through." The pilot shook his head, emotion building behind his eyes. "Iron Hand 6 was nobody. You were the last surviving lead in Operation Fire Angel." The airmen froze again. The words meant little to them, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. "Fire Angel," the veteran repeated quietly, as if tasting a memory that had grown bitter with age. The snow fell thicker. The smell of jet fuel drifted on the cold air, and for the first time the old man allowed a fragment of the past to surface. "We flew into a valley that wasn't on any map," he said, voice steady but distant. "A whole mountain range lit like a bonfire. Anti-aircraft fire thick enough to write your name in the sky. The pilot nodded slowly. You led that run. You flew into a kill zone to get a trapped Ranger platoon out. One airman whispered. He flew. What did he fly? The veteran exhaled. For a moment the winter wind carried the faint echo of rotors long gone. A bird that doesn't exist anymore, he said. Back when fighters didn't fly themselves and every mistake cost you your name on a wall. Another airman shook his head. No way. That operation is in classified briefing slides. They said the pilot never made it out. The pilot looked at him sharply. He didn't, at least that's what the report said. They listed him KIA because no one saw him land. His aircraft limped back across the line with a blown engine, zero hydraulics, canopy shattered, fuel pouring out like a waterfall. The airmen stared at the old man in disbelief. Sir, the youngest one whispered. How did you survive that? The veteran shrugged gently. Sometimes you don't survive, not all the way. His eyes drifted toward the F-22, the modern machine gleaming like a blade against the snowy runway. Machines change, wars change, but the sky, he shook his head slowly, the sky never forgets the men it takes. The airmen felt a chill deeper than the winter wind. The pilot stepped closer, voice trembling. Sir, my father was in that platoon. He told me stories about a pilot who refused to turn back even when the whole mountain lit up. He said your voice on the radio was the reason he saw home again. The veteran blinked, eyes softening in surprise. Your father made it. Yes, the pilot whispered, because of you. And just like that, decades of silence cracked open on the flight line. The airmen who had mocked him felt their stomachs twist. They realized they hadn't been laughing at some confused old man. They had been laughing at a legend. The young airmen stood stiff as fence posts, the winter wind cutting across the runway as the pilot approached the old man with a reverence that made every mockery from earlier sting like a burn. Snow collected on the veteran's faded red shirt, clinging to the wrinkles in the fabric and the creases of his weathered hands, but he didn't brush it away. He simply looked at the pilot's face, the disbelief there, the gratitude, before lowering his eyes as if the weight of the past pressed too hard on his shoulders. The pilot swallowed, voice unsteady. Sir, my father told me he never heard courage like yours. When your call sign went silent on the radio, they thought you were gone. They said Iron Hand 6 died buying them time. The old man exhaled slowly. Bought time, yes. Died, no, though for a while I wished the reports were right. The airman flinched at the hollow sorrow in his tone. The pilot turned, staring sharply at the three young men who had mocked the veteran only minutes before. His jaw tightened. Airmen, do you have any idea who you were laughing at? They didn't answer. They couldn't. Their shame boiled under their skin, making them look smaller by the second. The wind picked up, tossing dry snow across the tarmac like powdered glass. In the distance, a security truck slowed as the driver noticed the gathering. The pilot reached for the radio clipped to his vest. Tower, this is Raptor 17. I need base command at my location immediately. Priority. A voice crackled back, confused. Command. Sir, what's the situation? The pilot didn't take his eyes off the old man. Tell them Iron Hand 6 is on the flight line. Silence, then a burst of static, followed by a shocked voice. Say again. Iron Hand 6 is here, the pilot repeated. Alive. The frequency erupted. Within seconds, the base tower, hangar control, and command office erupted in frantic chatter. The name jumped from radio to radio like a lightning bolt striking every corner of the base. The security truck accelerated. Two more vehicles appeared far down the runway. A hangar door began rising, mechanics spilling out in confusion. The airmen stared at each other, wide-eyed. What's happening? One whispered. The pilot didn't look at them. Your entire chain of command is about to lose its mind. The veteran winced. Son, I didn't come here for a parade. I'm just passing through. Wanted to see how the new birds fly. Sir, the pilot said gently, determination hardening his voice, men like you do just pass through. You don't get to disappear, not after what you did. One of the older crew chiefs jogged toward them, confusion turning to shock as he recognized the veteran's posture, the way he carried himself, the quiet command in his stance. The chief's radio slipped from his fingers, clattering loudly on the concrete. It can't be, he whispered. Sir, is that really you? The veteran offered a small nod. The chief staggered back, breath catching. I read your after-action report in training, he stammered. They told us it was classified because no one believed a human could fly a bird with that much damage. They said you held it together on instinct alone. Instinct, the veteran said quietly, and a lot of fear. The chief swallowed, overwhelmed. The colonel needs to see this. He'll want to know. He'll need to be here. As if summoned by the words, a convoy of vehicles screeched to a halt near them. A full-bird colonel stepped out, eyes scanning the runway with urgency. When he saw the old man, his entire body locked like someone had hit a switch. The color drained from his face. The wind went still. The airmen held their breath. The colonel whispered, almost reverently, Iron Hand 6 reporting alive. And with trembling hands, he began to raise a salute. The colonel's hand rose slowly, trembling in the icy wind as the salute formed, not sloppy, not hesitant, but sharp, exact, and filled with a reverence that struck the flight line like a shockwave. The airmen who had mocked the old man earlier stared in stunned silence, their breath frozen in their throats as realization swept over them like a blast of cold air. The old veteran shifted uncomfortably, his faded red shirt flapping in the wind, white beard touched by drifting snowflakes, worn boots planted firmly in the ground as if bracing himself against memories that refused to stay buried. "Colonel," he said softly, "there's no need for that. I'm retired. Been retired longer than you've been wearing that uniform." But the colonel kept the salute locked in place, voice cracking with emotion. "Sir, everything I learned about loyalty, survival, and courage came from studying what you did. What you accomplished should be impossible. And yet, here you are." Slowly, the old man returned the salute out of politeness more than pride. But even that brief gesture sent a ripple of whispers through the growing crowd of personnel gathering along the flight line. More security trucks rolled up. Pilots in flight suits hurried over. Crew chiefs stood frozen halfway through their tasks. Mechanics stepped out of hangars, squinting in disbelief. The name Iron Hand 6 was spreading like wildfire, jumping from radio to radio, from headset to headset, until the entire base buzzed with tension and awe. One of the young airmen finally found his voice, though it cracked with fear and guilt. "Colonel, sir, who is he really?" The colonel turned sharply toward the airmen, his expression a mixture of disbelief and controlled fury. "You're standing in front of the man who executed the most dangerous rescue run in Air Force history. The man who flew into a valley of pure fire and brought home men everyone else had sworn were lost. The man whose aircraft was destroyed mid-flight, but he landed it anyway. The man whose mission report is still used at the academy to teach pilots how to keep their heads when the sky turns into hell." The airmen shrank under the weight of those words. The old man shook his head slowly. "Stories get bigger as people forget the details," he muttered. "I wasn't a hero, I just did what needed doing." The colonel stepped closer until he was standing directly in front of the veteran, eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Sir, you were more than a hero. You changed the lives of every man on that ground team. The Rangers who survived still talk about the pilot who wouldn't leave them." The veteran's breath hitched slightly, a flicker of old pain crossing his face. "A lot of good men didn't make it out," he murmured, "and that's what I remember, not medals, not call signs." The pilot who had first recognized him stepped forward, voice barely above the wind. "Sir, my father said your voice over the radio sounded like calm in the middle of the world ending." The veteran's eyes softened. "He made it home, that's what matters." The colonel exhaled, trying to steady himself. "Sir, with your permission, Base Command would like to formally acknowledge your presence." The old man grimaced. "Command knows I hate attention." "They know," the colonel swallowed. "But sir, for men who owe their lives to you, seeing you standing here alive is the greatest honor they'll ever receive." More vehicles began arriving. Officers of various ranks stepped out, confusion melting into shock as they recognized the call sign. The flight line transformed into a stage of awe and reverence, with the old veteran standing alone at the center, humble, quiet, unchanged by the storm of respect rising around him. And then the colonel said the words that sealed the moment forever. "Men, stand at attention for Iron Hand 6. Every soldier, pilot, and crew chief snapped upright. Salutes rose like a wave. And the old man, eyes misting, realized the past he tried to leave behind had finally come home to him. The wind howled across the runway as the old veteran stood surrounded by a sea of salutes, the cold biting at his faded red shirt, the snow gathering in the threads of his white beard. Rows of pilots, airmen, mechanics, and officers stood stiffly at attention, their breaths frosting in the air as they honored a man they had once believed was long dead. The veteran lowered his gaze, overwhelmed, gripping the edge of the maintenance crate beside him to steady himself. He had never wanted recognition, never wanted anyone to know what he carried from that night, but here he was, confronted by generations of airmen who had grown up studying his mission as if it were myth. The colonel finally dropped his salute and stepped closer, his voice softer now. "Sir, the base would be honored if you would walk the flight line with us. The younger pilots would give anything to hear from the man who made the impossible look routine." The veteran sighed, looking out toward the rows of modern aircraft, sleek F-22s, hulking transports, drones humming in heated shelters. "These birds don't need my lessons," he said quietly. "They fly with computers now. They don't buck, kick, or scream like the ones we had." The pilot who had recognized him shook his head eagerly. "Sir, the machine's changed, but the sky hasn't. And courage never changes." A wave of emotion washed over the veteran, but he hid it behind a subtle nod. "All right," he murmured. "One walk, Word spread like lightning. Airmen lined the taxiway. Crew chiefs stood beside open panels. Pilots waited at the foot of their ladders. As the colonel escorted the old man down the line, a quiet reverence fell over the base. The veteran paused beside each aircraft, sometimes placing a hand on the metal as if listening to something only he could hear. "She's a fine bird," he'd say softly, or with a faint smile, "doesn't smell like burning hydraulic fluid, that's new." Laughter rippled through the crowd, respectful, warm. The old man's posture straightened slightly with each step, as though some part of him forgotten long ago began to reawaken. When they reached the final jet, the F-22 he'd been sitting beside earlier, the pilot turned to him. "Sir, would you bless her with a pre-flight look, just for tradition?" "Tradition?" The veteran chuckled. "I didn't know I had one." "Sir, you have many." The veteran stepped closer to the jet, examining the landing gear, touching the cold metal of the intake, looking up at the canopy with a depth of understanding no manual could teach. He tapped the nose gently. "You were right earlier," he told the pilot. "She's heavy on the trim. Nose tanks must be full. Pull a little right on rotation." The pilot's eyes widened. It was exactly the issue maintenance had reported the day before. Airmen who had mocked the veteran earlier felt their shame burn deeper. They stepped forward, heads bowed. One spoke, voice cracking, "Sir, we were wrong. We didn't know who you were. We didn't know what you were." The veteran looked at their young faces, full of regret, full of potential. He placed a steady hand on the nearest airman's shoulder. "The uniform doesn't make a man," he said softly. "Respect does. Learn that, and you'll serve well." The airman nodded, tears threatening. The colonel approached once more. "Sir," he said quietly, "we'd like to record your story for the archives, for the next generation of pilots." The old veteran looked out across the snowy field where jets idled and airmen stood watching him with reverence he had never asked for. "Maybe someday," he whispered, "but not today. Today, I just want to hear the engines one more time." The colonel signaled the pilot. Moments later, the F-22's turbines roared to life, sending warm air and swirling snow across the veteran's boots. He closed his eyes, letting the vibration echo through his bones, a sound he thought he'd never feel again. When he opened them, he smiled. A small, quiet smile of a man who finally understood. His legacy had never died. It had just been waiting for him to return.